Welcome back to the Coyote Cast. I'm joined today by Kurt Cobain. You always wear yourself on your shirt?
Yeah. I mean, self-representation, advertisement.
Am I standing in a good spot for you? Alright, you guys better watch this whole thing. You better show this to everybody you know. I'm watching you. Alright? So now we're going to get right to this, okay? Enjoy. Welcome. Sitting here today, Rowan Williams.
Yeah. Hello.
How you doing today, Roman?
I'm doing all right. You know.
Descriptive, my man.
Yeah.
What have you been up to?
Well, not that much lately. I went to Bowling Green in the fall. We haven't seen each other for a while, but did that, and then I couldn't go in the spring because I had some family issues and financial issues. So I worked in a factory for about 4 months.
How was that?
Oh, it was interesting, yeah? I suppose. I met some a third shift, mind you.
Ooh.
Yeah, in a factory. It wasn't that bad. It was the people. Not a single one of them did not have a criminal record.
Really?
They were all, yeah. And that's most of the reason why I left. Part of it was I was starting to develop tendonitis along my left radial tendon, and I play a lot of guitar. It's like one of my main recreational pastimes, so I couldn't let that kind of interfere with my life.
Right.
So I ended up quitting. I actually just walked out one night. I got so fed up with the pain, and there was some, well, I don't know if you've noticed, but I look kind of like a young boy, and there were some pedophiles there that really took a liking to me. One
really?
6'5" man. Yeah, he came up to me every night. He told me that he was old enough to be my daddy.
Oh my gosh, man! What do you even do in that kind of a situation?
You laugh. I I came in every night with my my old winter cap on, my trapper's cap, and I put earbuds in. You're not supposed to wear them, but nobody could see Bluetooth earbuds, and I would just listen to lectures and audiobooks and try to ignore everybody. So they were a crazy cast of people.
Yeah.
And yeah, I made really good money though, like $11.75 an hour. I managed to save up enough to get me through the summer doing whatever and some textbooks and stuff.
That's like a great way to learn too. Like when you have one of those kind of menial jobs where you're just doing repetitive stuff, just throwing the earbuds.
Like, 'cause when you're active like that, it really opens up your like mental plasticity. You can really retain a lot of information.
I've noticed that too. Like if you're moving around.
If you just like, I know I don't look like I work out, but if I just like get really groggy, I do some sit-ups or some push-ups, get myself back in the mood, listening to a lecture like that. That really helps.
Yeah, for sure. That'll wake you up. I was feeling like crap yesterday, and I went for a bike ride and put on a podcast. I was feeling good until I popped my bike tire.
Really?
Yeah, luckily Andy was close enough. He went and bailed me out, but...
Yeah, last night I saw, remember Mrs. Mikowski?
Yeah.
I saw her hop on a bike. That was interesting, yeah. I don't think she remembered how to ride one.
Really?
Yeah.
Did she fall?
No, she just sort of pedaled a few feet and then was like, I don't remember how to do this, and put it back.
Oh.
It was her son's bike, so.
Yeah. It's one of those things, I don't know if I could forget it or not. I've been doing it for such a little kid.
I felt that way about a lot of things, but I was amazed by some of the stuff I've forgotten. That everybody forgets, like.
That's what I feel like. I've started to get to a point where I'm forgetting like just as much as I'm learning. It's like I don't know if I'm so loaded up. It's just like ow. And I get so frustrated sitting trying to think of things that I spent time studying. And
yeah, that's why you really have to know what's important to you, like what you want to know more about, so you can like disregard all of the
that's true,
like pointless information.
Well, yeah, because you really only have so much time and so much like mental bandwidth that you really have to like kill some ideas and move them on in order for new stuff to come in.
Yeah. So I have I don't know, like after I get my bachelor's degree, I don't know what I'm going to go into because there are a few fields I'm interested in like heavily. I really can't pick between them, but they
Which
all
are?
seem to go. Mostly like physics, philosophy, and neurology. I think a lot about that. I'm interested in psychology as well, but there are a few fields that I'm interested in that I feel I can educate myself upon, so I don't really need to spend $10,000 a year.
Yeah, I definitely feel like that with psychology. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of good books and good lecturers out there just for free on YouTube.
I feel that way sort of with neurology. The thing about physics, why I'm doing my bachelor's in physics and philosophy, is mostly because like that background in mathematics is really good for any academic pursuit, and that's what you get with physics, really.
The other thing I've noticed about physics is like I'm doing engineering, so it's a lot of physics and math, and it's a much more disciplined thing. Like you have to actually kind of focus on it, more than like if it's history or philosophy and stuff. Typically, I can just hear it and kind of like understand it, but like the numbers, I gotta work. It's a little more discipline to it.
Have you ever looked into like Bertrand Russell or Wittgenstein, like Ludwig Wittgenstein's philosophy?
Not a whole lot, no. What about it?
That's like some of the most intellectually rigorous stuff I've ever really looked into, because it's like analytical logic, which Bertrand Russell spent a lot of his career trying to prove that analytical logic is analogous to mathematics in the sense that they follow sort of the same rules. In a way, it makes sense. Like syllogism can be sort of likened to mathematics, but it's just very difficult stuff to read, like the Tractatus Logico Philosophicus by Wittgenstein. It's very interesting. He writes on, I like his linguistics theories and things that are very fun to read about, but then when he gets into like logically proving everything, it's a real pain.
That's when you get tough. Yeah,
or The Critique of Pure Reason by Immanuel Kant. I read that.
Now what was that about?
So technical, it almost killed me. It was so there was like this issue. It was the Enlightenment era of philosophy. There was this issue between the ideas of subjective idealism and empiricism, and it was like John Locke and David Hume would say basically you were born as a tabula rasa, or blank slate, Latin for that exact translation, but you so basically everything that you were mentally, or everything that made up yourself, was basically learned or like based upon sense experience and retention of information, so you could shape a human any way you want, basically. But then George Berkeley said the exact opposite thing, in that sense experience, it doesn't necessarily need to be linked to the like noumenal or physical world. So you could just say that everything is sense experience and there is no physical world, and everything just exists in your mind, like the Cartesian demon problem. But then Kant came in and sort of blew that argument out of the water, which is why I wanted to read The Critique of Pure Reason, because that interested me so much. But he basically said that there were prerequisites for experiencing anything at all. Like you had to be born with the ability to observe time and observe space. Like he developed a priori and a posteriori logic, or knowledge.
Okay.
A priori being things that you sort of reasoned to or were inherent, and a posteriori being things that you sort of observed, or like sense experiences that you would take in, that sort of idea. And then he also had analytic and synthetic distinctions between those two, but basically it would be like something that would be like an analytic a priori assertion would be like 2 + 2 = 4. So the predicate is implicit in the subject, and the subject is implicit in the predicate. Like 2 + 2 is just another way of saying 4. So they are equal to one another. But he said basically at birth, you're born with the ability to know that all objects or all bodies extend, in the sense that things that are you understand 3 dimensions when you're born, like it takes up space.
Right.
You have to have that knowledge when you're born. And since then, there are people like Jean Piaget, who was a psychologist. Although he didn't call himself a developmental psychologist, he thought of himself as genetic epistemologist. He basically wanted to prove like sort of biological groundings for knowledge, or what knowledge was. And so like you're born with reflexes is what he would say, something like that, like ways in which you respond to stimuli.
Right. For instance, like if you throw a baby in water, it has that reflex. What do you remember what that reflex is called? It has that reflex where it won't breathe in. It's the throat closes.
No, I wouldn't know the technical name of it.
But yeah, there's that reflex that's naturally and all.
That's what you're talking about. I've been thrown into water a few times. Yeah, there was that, and there was an experiment they did where they took a baby, and they basically they took like two tables, and there was a space between them, and they put glass over it. Mm-hmm. And they took the baby and they set it on one table, and it walked up to the edge, and it looked, and like it wouldn't walk over the glass because what it saw was just a place of falling off, like a place where it could fall off. So it had that reflex of no, I'm gonna stay here where it's safe, and sort of things like that. And then you build upon that. Piaget's like most interesting idea to me was that the development of morality in humans would come from basically playing games when you're a kid. So like whenever you're,
this one.
Have you? Oh, yeah. I love this because I am sort of in my like biggest philosophical interests are like ontology and metaphysics and sort of morality and ethics, stuff like that. Because I have a big grounding in theology, but basically, and I think this is absolutely accurate. But like, you play games with other kids when you're young, you know, and kids don't really understand the rules, but when they get together, they know how to play the game. Like if you take a kid out and you say, what were the rules to that game you were just playing? They'll say something different from everybody else, but they get together and they know how to interact, and those interactions develop like their ability to empathize. An important
thing with that too is that the rules are always like evolving within that game. Like if ever the rules stop working, they just make new rules and continue on with the game. Right.
And it really, I mean, those sort of social interactions really help kids develop like that. Like, because at a certain point, up until you're 4, a lot of what you are is developed by your parents, you know, and then you're thrown out into like the world, interacting with other kids, and from there, really on, most of like what you've learned since has been from society and like culture,
right?
Other kids, your contemporaries, peers, whatnot.
Now, have you looked into anything about epigenetics at all?
Oh yeah, that's making a huge comeback lately. Because that was like back when Darwin was around.
Well, for a long time, it got completely thrown out because it was considered racist in some senses. Well, because what you kind of had happen was like the Germans kind of abused epigenetics.
Yeah.
And then it was kind of like thrown out of the mainstream scientific speech for a long time. But yeah, it is starting to come back a bit.
Yeah, there was a huge thing. Like when, I don't remember the exact time, but you know, in the 19th century when it was Charles Darwin and Lamarck, I don't remember his first name, but he had Lamarckian evolution, which was basically that you would inherit specific traits from your direct parents or grandparents that would be like of effect. And then Darwin said, no, it's more along the lines of like you inherit it from your environment, and like the whole species would basically be the same. And that was more well accepted than Lamarck's ideas for the longest time, because there were no clear observations at the time. Like if you learned something, there was no reason to believe your kid would be good at that. Like if you could play guitar, your kid's not going to necessarily be able to play guitar.
Right.
So like any learned experiences you have didn't get passed on. So that was thrown out, and then that came back in the 20th century.
Well, because now I think they're starting to see that there are things that you can do that actually flip genetic switches. Like you can flip genes on and off, and then you can express those traits through your actual actions and through your choices.
Yeah, it's like it's also a big thing. Like when a mother is pregnant, there's technically 3 generations of like meiotic reproductive abilities living within her. Like there's her, there's the baby, and there's the baby's reproductive organs or cells or whatever.
Okay.
So those can all be affected by the same stimuli at once. So like if the mother is exposed to radiation, then the kid could have issues, and then the kid's kids could have issues, and that could be passed down through generations. That's like a completely different aspect.
Well, even if you look at hormone expression through pregnancy, that's a really interesting thing. A lot of times women in harsher environments the babies have a lot higher testosterone levels than in a better environment. Or even if you look at, sometimes if the mother, I think it's like aerobic activity can actually raise some estrogen versus like weightlifting or more stressful things would give you more testosterone in the kid. And the theory would be that, well, you're in a bad environment, you might as well raise the kid to be more aggressive. He would fit in better in that environment.
Yeah, that happens a lot, especially if kids don't get like after they're born, if they don't get socialized before the age of like 2 or 4, well, to where like there's like a rule of thumb, like you make your kids somebody that you would like, and not just like, you know, baby them or be like have to make them develop an Oedipal complex or anything like that. And if they don't do that well, then they usually end up being very asocial or antisocial, which would make them aggressive.
Right.
Like terribly so.
That's one thing with our society. We're kind of more separated now than we were before. You look at some of the earlier cultures, and those kids would naturally just be socialized because they're always around other kids, they're around other parents, grandparents, even more so than you would see today.
Now most people's social interactions are with like a screen and a keyboard. Those are your friends, and that's about it. There's also this is almost digressing back to a previous point, but there's this. I believe it's the youngest prince right now, the one that was just recently born. He's being sent into a preschool, and they have a specific rule that the kids cannot develop best friends. They have to have like equal friendships, because it's this egalitarian opinion that like everybody has to have equality of outcome, and I think that's absurd. Like,
it's absolutely absurd.
You have to have a best friend. That's like really how you develop the understanding of like a close, intimate relationship almost. Like, obviously it's not, you're a kid, you don't have like those sexual ideas, so you go for somebody the same gender so you can relate to them, and then you grow up being like extremely close. I had a number of best friends that I can remember, and that helped me a lot, because I didn't have like good parentage or anything like that at all. I really developed to be the person I am from really my social interactions with people at school. Good teachers. We went to a very good primary school and secondary.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So no best friends. What is the idea behind that? Just that everybody's equal?
Yeah, because they would feel that people would get left out. Like if you had an odd number of kids, it'd be like their best friends, and oh, there's Johnny. He's alone. I guess.
I don't understand that. You can't meddle so much in things. You kind of have to let. Because some things.
We're humans. We're not like the ultimate arbiters of natural development. We don't know what's best for people. Even we have a lot of knowledge, but there are still a lot of things, especially about consciousness and development, that we don't understand at all.
Oh, like, not at all. I mean, especially if you get into into consciousness, we really have. Very, very limited knowledge.
That's one of my favorite topics to study, but there's so many different ideas, and none of them can be really proven, or they're all so ambiguous and just intriguing in general.
Absolutely. Even if you look, that's one thing about evolution that I've never really understood, is how consciousness would develop.
Yeah, it is sort of strange. I mean, a lot of what our consciousness seems to be is like a more cortical mass, because you can, or like more sulci, you can judge the intelligence of a creature by how, like the depth and the quantity of their sulci, which are the creases in your brain. Okay. Like those little folds. Like if you look at a dolphin brain, it's pretty close to a human brain. It has a lot of creases. And if you look at a rabbit brain, it's smooth. It's perfectly smooth, which is kind of funny. Same thing with a cat brain. And something interesting about a cat brain is you can actually take all of the like cerebral cortex out and leave it with just a hypothalamus, which is part of the limbic system, like an inner. It basically regulates thirst, hunger, carnal desires, all those things. The cat will function almost completely normally. You wouldn't be able to tell there was anything wrong with it, but it's missing most of its. And so, neural mass.
And I don't think that that's necessarily a marker of intelligence, but do you think it'd be more of a marker of morality or self-consciousness?
Cognition. I could definitely see that being the case. It seems
because cats seem intelligent, but
they don't
care. They have like no
they have
emotion really. I mean, now some people would sit and argue with you about their cat, but
I would prefer to not talk to some people like that. But there's
same with rabbits. I've seen rabbit. One time I was hunting rabbits, and one was wounded. And it looked up to me like as I was about to finish it, and it knew, it put its head down and just
it
knew it was about to die. It was a really weird experience.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
They say we are by far the most social of the primates, and they believe that's a huge the ambiguous they, but it's believed that that's a big part of like what developed our intelligence, is like being in larger social groups, like rather than just familial relations, you now have social relations to worry about. So it's almost like
I mean, that's probably how we survived. We were one of the weakest,
I know,
smallest, but we had intelligence and the ability to use tools and to rely on other people.
This is an interesting like modern theory that I don't know if you've heard about this, but people are starting to hypothesize that humans are sort of like half aquatic apes, that we evolved like right because we early hominids evolved in like the veldt of Africa. Our ancestor hominids, there were other hominids like Australopithecus or whatever. I can't remember the exact genus, but we evolved.
All right, we had to take a quick break, check the camera, make sure everything's rolling, but we're gonna get right back into it.
All right, so yeah, we evolved near like sources of water, like by the ocean, by the Nile, by various rivers and lakes and streams. So it's hypothesized, I believe, fairly recently. It couldn't be more recent than 80s or 90s. I don't know when the literature came out, but because we cry saltwater tears, females have subcutaneous fat, which is analogous to blubber in like aquatic mammals. We have large flipper-like feet that aren't really adapted to climbing like most primates. They're more adapted to swimming. We're very strong swimmers and we're hairless. People believe that we're like half aquatic apes. We're semi-aquatic mammals, basically.
Right.
Which...
That's what I found that very interesting. I just never... I don't know how you make the leap from in the water to on the land. Yeah. I mean, I guess you can see it in some... like there are animals that do spend time in water and on land.
They're mostly reptiles. I guess in some mammals like seals will come on land, and dolphins were once land mammals, and then they went back into the seas.
Really?
Yeah, there's a brilliant...
Why did that? Don't they have like little like things? That
they have vestigial hind legs. Yeah.
Yeah.
So do whales. Whales were once... They look kind of like dog-like creatures in all artistic representations I've seen of them. There's a funny... I believe it was an Alan Watts quote that I read once. That was basically, we all came onto land once, and then the dolphins had the good sense to go back into the water where they could just party and be jubilant all the time.
Right, and it's so weird how we've treated those animals too.
It is.
Like the mass killings of whales in the... When was that? I think the late 1800s. They just absolutely decimated them just for the oils and...
I mean, at the time, there were a lot of papers published that would say, like, the oceans are so extensive, we could never overfish, we could never kill too many of these things. They're just everywhere. They've proliferated like crazy for thousands of years. And then, of course, in, like, the 70s and 80s of, like, 1970s and 80s were the first times where we were really, like, looking at what we've done to the world.
Right.
In ways like that, like, it's when we first started noticing, like, big changes in climate. And, like... we've overfished a lot of places. There are places where cod will probably never exist again. Yeah. Or at all.
Now, luckily, we're starting to see a little bit of swing back in some of those areas. Especially if you look at what some of the parks programs have done in the U.S. Now, some of them aren't the best managed, but you see, especially out west, like in the Yellowstone region and stuff, there have been a huge comeback with the wolves.
And American bison and stuff like that.
Yeah, the bison are at, I think, higher levels than at certain points, like in the 1800s, 1900s, when they were starting to get over-hunted.
That's pretty great.
Now, I heard someone... Now, obviously, there's a huge buffalo massacres. Like, they were trying to starve out Indians, take away food sources from natives. And but I've heard someone hypothesize that even if settlers didn't do that they would have got wiped out anyways.
The Indians?
No.
Or the bison?
Well, the bison. But the Indians as well had started to decline in population.
They had diseases to worry about.
Diseases, and also when horses were when horses were introduced, I guess they split up into warring tribes and they kind of fought each other more. Whereas before they were more of a agricultural society. They began kind of overhunting and going to war with each other.
I know at the time, back to philosophy, I guess, because Thomas Hobbes and John Locke wrote on the Indians a lot because it was a time when we were starting to settle over here, and people were debating whether we should like colonize here or leave the Indians be because it's their land. They wrote on things like John Locke wrote on property a lot, and he said, well, nobody owns the earth. They haven't segmented like regions, political regions, so they don't own anything, is basically what he said, which it's a little deplorable to think about now in retrospect, of course, but Thomas Hobbes also said that when you live in a state of nature, you live like beasts, basically. Yeah. It's a short, savage life, so it's nothing that we're taking away from them. We're helping them by, basically.
Right, and I go back and forth. Now, when you look at it, a lot of times the interactions that colonists had with natives most of them left and went and lived with the natives and never came back.
Yeah.
Like, even if they got kidnapped and had opportunities to come back, they never wanted to come back. Because they liked the lifestyle better.
Yeah, it was such a different lifestyle. I mean, they were very spiritual people, and they were nomadic. It was basically like going back to where we once were in nature, where we were like in a balanced ecosystem almost. Like we have no clue how long the Native Americans were really living here, for how many thousands of years, and yet they managed to stabilize all of those populations of like American creatures that are now we decimated with our ways of life and stuff.
That's why I always wonder, what is the trade-off of modern life, of extending? It's almost like we're reaching towards something, but I don't.
The other night I was this is kind of weird to talk about, but the other night I was laying in bed and I was thinking about the story of Adam and Eve, and I was thinking about like exiting the garden being analogous to our exit of our stable ecosystem, like when we were once just like unconscious hominids hunting only what we needed and like living basically like not what's it if you're a carnivore and an omnivore.
Yeah.
My apologies. Living like as omnivoric lions almost, and everything was stable and kind, and then one day we just developed consciousness, and that was our extinct. We ate the fruit, and that's supposedly what developed consciousness in Adam and Eve. And then they looked down and said, "Dear God, I'm naked."
Right. I think that is a big part of the story, is developing the self-consciousness. Because if you're not self-conscious, you can never sin.
Yeah.
You're just not
aware
of it.
You have no knowledge of good and evil.
Right.
That's like the direct quote.
That's one thing in that story I always... Like, a lot of people are always like, oh, why did they eat the fruit? Like, I wish they would have never ate the fruit. We would have never had to go through problems and stuff. But I always thought, I was like, man, that's weird that they think like that.
Well,
because it had to happen in order to, you know what I mean?
Yeah, God literally said, if you eat of the fruit, you will live like God. Like, you will have the knowledge that God has.
Now,
Yahweh.
Not to take away from that, but this book right here is called Stealing Fire. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard the Greek legend. Prometheus.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what the intro to that book was about, stealing fire.
Interesting.
Yeah. Prometheus, that's an interesting legend as well.
Oh, yeah.
He actually stole the fire from Zeus, right, and brought it down to the humans.
Then he got cursed and
gave it to him.
Yeah.
What happened? Does he get his liver eaten every day or something?
He dies in a different way every day, and then comes back the next morning, basically.
He's regenerated, huh?
Yeah. And it's supposed to be very torturous. I mean,
yeah,
you can't really.
So that's the price of consciousness.
Yeah, in a way, giving fire to the humans.
That's what I mean, the thing with being self-conscious is you definitely. I mean, that's where pain comes in. Yeah.
I mean, people like Soren Kierkegaard say that pain and despair are the only, like, indisputable parts of life. Like, they're the very basics of human life. Because nobody will ever deny that they're in pain if they are. Everybody knows what pain is like, but you can't really, in the same way, understand happiness, because you could question whether you've ever actually genuinely felt happy. But you can't question if you've ever felt pain.
See, I think happiness, now there's a lot of shortcuts to pleasure and feeling good, but I think the only real sustainable one is like really striving towards something.
Yeah, working towards a goal.
And it's like something that is a little bit painful and that's difficult, and you're working towards some endpoint.
Mm-hmm. And then once you get there, you just have to find something else.
I know.
Because if you ever reach a goal, then you're like John Dewey had a quote that's like, arriving at one goal is just the beginning of another.
Yeah.
And a lot of like phenomenologists, philosophers like to talk about it, and it's Dostoevsky actually wrote on it, like, if you were put into utopia, what then? Would you just start smashing everything? Because what else are you going to do?
What else are you going to do? That's the other thing that I've had on heaven, like thoughts on heaven.
Yeah, I about that too.
A lot of people like just want to go to a place of perfection, but I've never understood how what would that even be?
I guess you're not really, in the fundamental Christian view, you're not supposed to understand it until you are there.
There would have to be like,
you know,
it couldn't be that, you know, a lot of people think like you would just be, all knowledge would be revealed to you. You know, I think a lot of people kind of feel that connotation.
That would be my dream.
That would be my dream, but then what are you going to do?
just experience, I guess. Experience the everything.
You've already experienced it all, man.
I know, but
that's like King Solomon in the Bible. You read Have you ever read Ecclesiastes?
Yes.
That's a great book. It's he sits there and he's like, I've had everything, and he's like, meaningless, all is meaningless, you know. Like, I've had all the women, I've had all the wine, I've had all the riches. Like,
yeah, what now?
He's like, I sat and chased wisdom for all the time. Even
that's how
I felt that was the best pursuit, and even that brought nothing.
That's how Thomas Aquinas felt, because he was in the time of like the Roman Empire. He was like an emperor's son or something. He lived basically the high life as well as he could, and he still felt empty. And he adopted the philosophy of Stoicism, basically, like live in moderation, not quite an ascetic lifestyle, like you're starving yourself or anything like that, but basically just don't try to overindulge in pleasure, and just be stoic. I
think Stoicism's a great philosophy. Have you read any of Seneca or Marcus Aurelius?
I have read Seneca, yeah. And Epictetus.
Yeah. I think that is one philosophy that really you kind of can live your life by. And it's probably one of the more effective ones. I don't think it's perfect by any means, but it's more effective. And I think, again, with self-consciousness, I think that's what's helped us drive forward, is that we're able to delay gratification. We're able to give up pleasure now as a sacrifice and pay it forward to the future.
Yeah, a lot of people think the idea of sacrifice is what separates us from other animals, because like we are really the only ones that fully understand like giving up today so we can have more in tomorrow.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, even though you could say squirrels bury their nuts, but that's short term. That's very short term.
Well, and it's just practical. They have to get all those tannins out of it, or else they poison themselves.
Yeah.
You know?
I was going to say, Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah.
Another quote on the whole heaven thing. He said, part of the glory of heaven is watching those you hate suffer in hell. Which is very sort of dark for such a good Christian writer and philosopher, but it is something to think about, because that is like, there's that malevolence in everybody that wants to see the people they hate suffer, but that's like a big extreme.
Now, he said that, was there anything, do you know any of the surroundings to that?
I don't. I saw that
That's
quote,
one thing that you really would like to see.
It was in his writings, like depicting the traits of God and then the traits of heaven. And he said that was one of the glories of it.
That's what I've always thought was, another thing that I thought was weird is that, which I love the Old Testament. I find the Old Testament more interesting in most cases than the New Testament, that in some instances that there would be a jealous God. Or even a vindictive God. I
heard Jordan Peterson talk about an idea about how in the Old Testament, it's not his idea actually, it's a guy named Mircea Eliade, but I want to read some of his writings. I haven't gotten to them yet. But he wrote about how in the Old Testament you can see how God basically controls everything, and most of it's sort of like God doing everything. And then Abraham comes in and it sort of develops the individuals more. So it's like as the individual life increases, God is out of it more. And then the New Testament comes and he's not there.
That's what I think. You kind of see a development. When you're watching Israel, that is like the development of a utopia, of like a community utopia. You see they do great, bad king, they fall down again and get punished. Great. Like it happens, if you read Kings or Chronicles, it happens like 8 times, like almost the exact same story. And you see it continues to fail. And then Jesus comes in and it's kind of a complete revolution from that. And then it's more of a giving access of heaven, of utopia, to the individual, something that the individual can find and be with, like through Jesus, through his,
something about the Jews that went through that suffering. They never blamed it on God, like never in the Bible. They always like sort of accepted it as their fate or thought of it as their sort of problem and tried to fix themselves rather than just like Cain. He just cursed God and was tortured for it, basically. He said, my curse is too much to bear, when he killed his brother.
Yeah. And then he got marked to walk the earth.
And then everybody descended from him. And then Jesus willfully accepted suffering, knowing he might die on the cross. Have you ever read the Infancy Gospel of Thomas?
No.
It's exempt from the Bible.
Is that one of those Nag Hammadi codices? One of those like Dead Sea Scrolls?
Oh, no. It's not.
It wasn't one of those that they found later? That
It was found later, but not that much later.
Now, does that have touches of Gnosticism in it?
It sort of does. What it's mostly about is the youth of Christ. It's him from like basically when he's born until 31.
So like everything that's left out, like where he.
It's really interesting.
Does it talk about when he's in Egypt at all?
I don't
Do you know?
know exactly. I only know mostly of his childhood. He does some very like horrendous things. He curses a child to wither away because he like stole his toy or something.
Really?
And then when his parents come to question Mary and Joseph, he blinds them.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and then
I've never seen that side before.
But I really enjoy it because it's like Carl Jung's development of the fool into the hero. Because it's like he's the trickster and he's doing things he shouldn't, but then he learns from it and he brings the kid back. He unblinds the parents and he apologizes and he basically says I apologize for my sins and learns.
Right.
Like it's less of like, oh, just be as perfect as Christ. It's more like develop yourself like Christ. Sort of.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I think you need to see that like journey a little bit. That he actually went through struggles and had some personal things that he actually carried, like every other human.
Mm-hmm. He wasn't just born saving the world. Like
which is so weird to think about.
It is.
Now you said the trickster. Yeah. Now, do you know what other creature in mythology is often referred to as a trickster?
Mythology?
Yeah.
Not necessarily, no.
No, the coyote.
The coyote.
Is a trickster. And that's actually a little bit where the name of this podcast came from. I had a small bit of it. If you do read Jung, he has a good thing on the coyote on some of these Indians out in Washington, one of their mythologies, and it's really good. I'm not brushed up on it currently right now well enough to tell the story accurately, but it's a good read if you get the chance.
That does sound interesting. Yeah, I guess you could see the coyote as a trickster if it comes along stealing your children every so often out from the woods.
Well, no, coyotes are so smart too.
They are one of the most like intelligent.
They survive so well. Like they've gone everywhere. They're in every state in the U.S. now, I believe. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're not in Hawaii, but they're almost everywhere.
Yeah, and one of the creatures that persevered through our development.
Well, we tried to kill them. We tried to poison them and everything, and their numbers came back better. I guess the way it works is they do like roll calls, and if some are missing, the women go into heat and they have more pups. So if you kill them, there's actually more of them that come back.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
There's something sort of akin to that in chimps. They because they're infanticide, like killing the children of other males. That's in a lot of primate species, especially like gorillas are basically killing themselves now. Like we're trying to help them, we can't because they just keep running. They're in like such a close proximity now that all the males can kill all the babies, and none of them survive.
Same thing with bears. Bears kill, and they even
male bears.
They eat the young a lot.
Yeah, that's why the mama bear has to take them off on her own. But in chimps, right before she gives birth, like a week or two before, she'll go into estrus, so all of the males will mate with her, and then they won't know whose kid it is that she just had, so none of them will kill the kid.
Yeah, that's what some people like wonder why humans have concealed ovulation.
Yeah.
Versus like a lot of other primates.
It has to do with female selection. They get to they're like the selective maters, and males just have to compete with each other and hope
which is
that
opposite
they're chosen.
In most.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mostly it's the males that dominate that sort of.
Mm-hmm. Which is an interesting thing because you see like women that are typically they would be considered. I guess the idea is that they're very choosy, but then when they're in ovulation, that they would be more promiscuous.
Yeah.
And then you'd have multiple males that don't know who fathered the child.
Yeah.
So then they get cared for.
I first heard about that in a lecture on genetics by a guy named Robert Sapolsky, who's a Stanford professor. Yeah, he does a lot of, he did a TED Talk.
Yeah, he's been on Joe Rogan before. I've heard him there.
Yeah, he does a lot of interviews now, but this was some years ago, I think 2010 when he recorded it, and a couple years later when I watched it. But I think his exact quote was something like, yeah, and then all the male chimps will sit around thinking, what's the gestation period for my species?
All right, we're going to wrap up this segment. We'll be back. All right, we're back. You guys just missed the discussion on Hitler, Russia, cryptocurrency, all kinds of literature, fringe psychology. But right now, unfortunately, we can't get into all that right now. But you have a story for us?
Yeah, I suppose you guys would like to hear a good tale today. So
I have no idea what this is about. Andy just kind of told me you had a story, so
you're gonna find
I'm just gonna sit back.
Pretty interesting, I hope.
All right.
Not the most interesting of my stories, I don't think personally, but that's debatable, I suppose. But a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, well, it would have been about a year and 3 months ago that I started planning this because it was sort of a big project I wanted to do. So I'd heard for many years I've been interested in physics. And I had heard that people like Michio Kaku, they got famous by building, nuclear fission reactors in their garages. Of course, he was in a different country where they don't really monitor people as closely. But, so I thought, maybe I could get a pretty good college scholarship if I just built a fission reactor in my garage. So I started thinking about the ways I could do this. And, planning, because all you need, really, it's not that complicated to, the most volatile part is initiating the fission reaction of uranium-235, so it combines with one neutrino neutron, and my apologies, I just blanked for a moment, but one neutron becomes uranium-236, which is unstable, so it due to the small nuclear force, it breaks away into krypton and barium, okay. I believe, maybe beryllium, I don't remember exactly, but it's really irrelevant. That's just waste. So it does that, and then it basically would heat up water around it, and that thermal energy could then turn a turbine, or it becomes steam immediately. That releases a lot of energy, so you could utilize that, and use that to turn it into mechanical energy and then into electrical energy using a, any turbine engine or motor, whatever. And I had elaborate plans for this in a notebook. And the only thing that I really needed that would be very difficult to come by, other than the intense steel casings, which I could get because my dad is sort of he builds he's sort of an avant-garde engineer. Mm-hmm. He does electrical engineering and stuff at local factories. They just send him around wherever they need him, basically. So he has a lot of scrap metal parts and things. And I found a lot of stuff that I could use to make this casing. And I got on the dark web, and I got on a market website that was supposedly selling uranium-235 out of the Middle East.
Really?
Yeah, and I was looking at it one day, and I tried to message the guy that was selling it to buy it, and shortly afterwards, my computer was remotely commandeered, and then I received a phone call from a certain, I'll say institution or bureau. They were not too happy, and they said I'd be put on a terrorist watch list if I continued any activity for the next couple of months. Wow. And they were very ambiguous about it. And
did you get to explain yourself at all, or?
No, I said what I was doing, and they said, "Do you understand how dangerous that can be?" And I was like, "Yes, I do." But obviously I don't have the credentials to back it up. A high school diploma doesn't really make you qualified.
High school diploma and some research.
And it's okay. I took 12th grade English. I know what I'm doing. So yeah, that
So they shut you down.
That was one of the most terrifying things that's probably ever happened to me. And I burned my notebook. I did not want anything to do with it. It wasn't that. If I wanted to do it again, obviously, after I get my degree, maybe I'll be a nuclear engineer.
Do you think you actually could have done it?
I do. I wouldn't have really tried it if I didn't. I might have needed to.
How much uranium do you need to generate? Can it just be a small amount?
It's it can be a fairly small amount. You generate a lot of power off of it. I wanted to basically make my own, at-home grid, so everything would be run off of that for, a short time at the very least. And just to basically say that I did it, almost. It was sort of an arrogant...
How do you add a neutron?
See, it's sort of luck. You have to basically get something that radioactively decays and release a neutron. Because we can't, we can control electrons, like a cathode ray that shoots out electrons over a distance into from a cathode to an anode. But can't really do that with neutrons. They don't have a charge, so we can't really isolate them in any way. So you get something that decays slowly, certain elements that you can get will, because a proton is 2 up quarks and 1 down quark in a gluon field, and a neutron is 2 down quarks and 1 up quark in a gluon field. And basically, eventually, an up quark will decay into a down quark, and that will become a neutron, and that will be expelled from the nucleus of an atom outside of the columbarium, and then it will become a different element. That's how like nuclear decay works. Like uranium, if it just sits in the ground for long enough, it'll become like iridium and radon. And once it becomes radon, it seeps into your house. That's a huge problem with homeowners.
Toxic.
Yeah. And yeah, you suffocate basically. But
so I'm still sorry. I get how it could lose okay, when it decays. See, I feel like it would lose a neutron, not gain one.
What do you
mean? Or does
it
lose?
When the proton decays into a neutron.
The proton decays into a neutron.
Yeah, and that neutron would be expelled because there'd be really no strong force.
So it's an isotope of the.
Yeah, it would become an isotope of what? Well, no, it'd become a different element because the proton would be gone.
Oh, so it would go. Okay, so
it'd become a different isotope.
Element.
There's a chance that it would and of course uranium is.
So uranium is just something that naturally decays. That's why it.
Yes, it does because it's radioactive. That's really everything naturally.
So now,
decays,
why can't you like? Why does
carbon
just has a longer half-life, or why can you not use carbon
half-life like very
long.
millions of years? Yeah.
Okay.
But then like there are different isotopes.
Now, what about some of these that they make in labs that last for like seconds? Like the elements that they produce, you know, like there's certain elements that are so volatile that they only last like a few seconds.
Yeah, like Einsteinium.
Yeah.
They are. Some of them they were like theorized about before. Like you can theorize of any element. You could say, what if I took 1 million protons and 1 million neutrons? I made the nucleus of an atom. What? But you have to have a Hadron Collider basically, because you have to take an element and then accelerate like a proton really, really quickly, which you can isolate because they have a charge. But when you isolate it, it basically becomes like a light. That's hydrogen is one proton, so it'd be a light hydrogen. It'd usually pick up electrons, but you'd have to like get it going around a Hadron Collider very, very quickly and then collide it with whatever element you had. Mm-hmm. Or you could just collide two elements really quickly, and if you break the Coulomb barrier, they can... I guess you can't do that with two elements, actually. I don't know what I'm talking about there.
Really?
But, yeah, because that'd be fusion. You can't break the Coulomb barrier on something that intense.
Heavy water. What's heavy water?
Heavy water?
Have you heard of heavy water?
Heavy water, like out of your faucet?
An extra... No.
Okay. It's hard water. My apologies.
Heavy water is some...
Like...
I believe it has an extra...
Deuterium water?
Neutron.
Deuterium. Yeah, I mean, they could. You can make isotopes of just about any
because that's what
molecule.
During World War II, the Germans were trying to transport that, and there was some like Swiss like scientists that went and sabotaged it, sunk this boat that was transporting heavy water that they were using for nuclear research.
I mean, it could have been like one.
I'm trying to think.
It could have been a tritium and
Andy,
two
look
oxygens.
this up. Look up what the composition of heavy water is. Now, do you actually believe that anything can be isolated?
Like, what do you mean?
Like, I just don't feel that anything is ever isolated.
Things can be isolated for a short time. Not like quarks
but isn't it, it's
can't
always
be.
like relying. It's always interacting with something else, or has just interacted with something else.
Well, in a Hadron Collider, there's a vacuum.
Okay.
So. Deuterium.
Deuterium.
Yeah.
Oxygen.
Okay.
So what is deuterium? It's a hydrogen.
It's a hydrogen
with an extra.
Yeah, it's an isotope of hydrogen.
Okay.
With extra, neutrons.
Neutrons.
I can't believe I said neutrino.
Those are smaller ones, right?
They're they very, very rarely interact with actual matter. Nobody knows what their real purpose is. It's very speculative. But they managed to detect them in like the past 20 years.
Does that have to do with the dark matter stuff or not?
Sort of. They propagate through the universe. People aren't entirely sure why. Like there are neutrons are basically they're sort of like brother particles of like other leptons, which are electrons, tau particles, muon particles, and there's an electron neutrino, a tau neutrino, and a muon neutrino. Okay. And that's about all I really know about them. From my study of particle
how
physics,
do you study this?
How?
Yeah. On your own?
The internet. I've read like every book Stephen Hawking's ever written on any form of physics. I've read several other physics books that I'm unfamiliar with.
Okay, so Hawking. What is his theory on the Big Bang?
On the Big Bang,
right? Doesn't he?
He was a big advocate of the Big Bang,
right? Wasn't he one of the?
He was one of the people to like sort of prove it. Look at the cosmic microwave background of the planet.
Now, does he think that it's going to collapse again? Or is he...
They thought that for a long time, but that's been completely disproven by... So it's not like...
It keeps expanding, right? The universe?
Yeah, they didn't know that for a while because it seems intuitive that if there was a Big Bang, they called it the Big Crunch, where it would all... Like, it would reach a point at which the energy released by the Big Bang would be too insufficient to continue the expansion. So it would slow down and then...
All right, so entropy.
Yeah.
All right, so entropy... I've heard some people starting to say now that they don't believe in the law of entropy.
The law, like the second law of thermodynamics?
Yes.
In what way? In what respect could you disregard it?
That things actually get more complex that they don't naturally break down.
What do you mean? Well, the law of entropy could be described as everything getting more complex. In a way, something more chaotic has more energy, which could lead to things being more complicated.
That's true.
So it could lead to a complexity increase because the third law of thermodynamics is as everything approaches absolute zero, like 0 degrees Kelvin, entropy starts to reach zero as well. But things don't really cool off like that.
Except for quantum computing.
What, like?
Quantum computers. Don't they have them at like as close as they can get to zero?
Yeah.
Now, why do those operate so much faster?
Because they use quantum tunneling, which basically... an electron, it's one of the very odd parts of quantum mechanics, where quantum tunneling is where an electron can basically just decide to be on the other side of something out of nowhere based upon like a really abstract probability. And that allows like electrons within the computer to be in various places. Like right now, because of something called Moore's law, like circuits are getting smaller and smaller and smaller and more complex. There's actually a problem.
Well, that's just computing. That's computing power, correct? Mm-hmm. Moore's law.
Yeah, it's like
the
density of transistors in an area.
There's some stuff in here that, since we're talking about exponential growth. Excuse me, let me pull out my book. Okay, so this very first page is called Growth Modes and Big History. Okay. So basically it talks about how quickly we've grown since like the agricultural revolution. Yeah. Okay, the rate of growth. All right. I just want to read this little paragraph. It doesn't really have to do with computing. It's not really Moore's law, but it is exponential growth. So even the present rate of growth, this is our GDP, okay? Gross domestic product, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Rate of growth will produce impressive results if maintained for a moderately long time. So this is if it does not pick up speed. If the world economy continues to grow at the same pace as it has over the past 50 years, then the world will be some 4.8 times richer by 2050 and about 34 times richer by 2100 than it is today. That's at the current growth, not assuming it increases. And so this is saying that a doubling would occur every 6.3 years, that we would have that much more, we'd be that much richer as a population.
Wow. That sounds about...
Now, accurate. If another transition occurs, which is as it typically does, it would get to the point where it would double every 2 weeks. The entire GDP would double every 2 weeks. That's insane.
That is.
This is the chart of GDP. So you can see once we hit 1950, we just skyrocketed. And it's supposed to continue to grow faster and faster. So that's an interesting thing. I don't know if that's going to lead to abundance or not. Another thing, we talk about the wage gap. Now, I'm a huge proponent of just classic capitalism.
Yeah.
However, I think the wage gap, it's going to continue to get blown and blown more and more exponentially. Just because if you're smart and have just an ounce of ambition, you can't even help but just to start accumulating stuff. And if you have access now with the way that computing is going, computers are just going to pull in so many more resources that other people just don't even have available to them.
Well, that's what's happening. Like some of the poorest economies in the world, like Africa has the fastest growing economies in the world because of everybody's getting richer. Like it's not just the rich.
Right.
When you say the wage gap, what do you mean by that? Like
the
like between what
between
groups?
poor and rich. You're going to see more and more super rich.
Well,
like wealth is going to accumulate at the top. Like, have you seen the charts that say like 99% of wealth is held within like the top 1%?
Well, we're in the top 1% technically.
Sure.
Like,
have you
pretty
heard
much, if you make over $34,000 a year,
have you heard Pareto's
Pareto's distribution?
Or Pareto's, yeah.
Yeah, I have, but but the 1% fluctuates, so it's not like it's the same people. And within the 1%, actually 1% of those people have all of the wealth.
Yes.
It's like the top 10 richest people in the world out of the top 100 have the most wealth.
Right. And it just continues to pull itself up.
Pareto distribution's in a lot of things, but
a lot of it, natural things like gardening is where he found it originally, which is
it's really interesting. It's one of those things almost like
so Pareto's is 80-20, and basically like the skinny on it is that 80% of your results come from 20% of your effort. So say you had a fruit garden, 80% of your fruits would come from 20% of your producing plants. If you're running a business, 80% of your like orders are going to come from 20% of your clients.
Yeah, it's like a natural law almost. It's everywhere. But the only thing that doesn't fall in a Pareto distribution that I know of well is IQ. IQ is a normal distribution, but as the rich get richer, the poor get richer too. Like
right, yeah. And in one way, it's like a rising tide raises all boats, right?
Yeah, I mean, poor nowadays have the highest quality of life out of anybody.
Absolutely,
like,
but
ever in history.
In my take, humans do not care about absolutes. They're totally relative.
They really focus on extremes. Which
no, not even that. It's all about relative. Like you could be someone making $1 million versus and if you're around people that are making $5 million, you're gonna be just as depressed as someone making $1,000 versus someone making $5,000. It's all relative.
Yeah, they find that depression does act more harshly in like people that live around, like you said, people with extreme relative differences. So like if you're in a country that's entirely poor and you're poor, you're not gonna feel that bad. But if you're in a country that's rich and you're poor, then it kind of sucks for you. But
that's luckily another thing we've seen. A lot of the people that have a huge amount of wealth, they also do a lot of philanthropy. They also give back in many ways, which is excellent. But well,
it's gotten to a point where once you accumulate that much wealth, there's nothing you can do but give back. There's no large purchases worth billions of dollars. No. I mean, they can't really trade in things like that. Bill Gates gave away a lot of his money. He's done a lot of philanthropy.
Well, he's basically charitable. He's at a point where he can take on projects that are bigger than our government really can take on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's very wealthy. Although he's dispersing it quickly.
From a private standpoint, you know what I mean?
That's the thing about like giving having a lot of our technological assembly jobs in China. That's helping their economy hugely. Like the poor in China are becoming wealthier because we are doing that. And if we didn't do that, then they would become more poor. They could revert to a socialist union even. Right. That would be very bad.
Yeah, that's what a bunch of people get upset about, paying, going overseas and paying lower prices to get things done. But you're increasing their economies. Yeah. Like each economy has to go through certain stages.
And right now there are more open jobs in America than there are unemployed people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean,
unemployment is about as low as you can. What's it at? 3.8 right now? I believe
so.
That's about as low as you can get.
Yeah. I can't imagine it getting any lower. Although once Trump's out of office, it might go back up. I could see the market plummeting because it's doing so well right now.
That's an interesting thing. A lot of people are calling for it soon.
Yeah.
I don't know. Me personally, I have some money in the market. And personally, I don't know. I think you still have to be exposed to it because there's still a tremendous amount of growth out there. I don't think a lot of people are saying pull out and hold cash.
Yeah, but
the market has been on the biggest bull run, I believe, in history. Right now, it's in the biggest bull run.
Like even when you evaluate it for like the inflation of currency.
Correct.
That just means it could lead to the greatest depression in history. Because that's what happened right before the Great Depression. The market was great. Right before the recession.
However, one thing that you don't... The fundamentals, though, are still pretty intact. There's low levels of debt. Like, a lot of stuff on the books are a lot better. In 2008, there was so much faulty... Like, especially in those subprime mortgages, which is like a big thing they talk about. That sunk it. They're writing absolute crap. I mean, they're just writing bogus mortgages, and they thought that the good ones would be able to carry the failures. But the thing with markets is, again, it's people, and everything. Oh, people are rational. People are not rational at all. That's if there's one thing, people are not rational. That's what the markets prove. And so you have events like that where people just lose confidence, and it's just a flash, and it plummets.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if technology increases, like your book says it will, like a lot of men, I believe almost the majority of men in America have driving jobs. Like they drive Uber, they drive taxis, they do things like that, buses, whatnot.
Let me tell you, truck drivers, there's a huge shortage.
Well, they're all about.
Anybody want to drive trucks? Get out there and start driving.
Don't do it. Automated cars.
Yeah, they're going to put them out. Well, yeah, no, I mean, completely. But people are still going to have to be in the trucks for at least the next, I would say, 20 years before.
I don't know about that. I mean, they've been working on automated vehicles for the past 10 years, and they're very close. Like I know they are. And they'll be better drivers than any human because they're based upon satellites. They couldn't crash.
No, I agree with that, and I do think they will be better drivers. But there's also a thing where, like, you start losing, like, even though it kind of gives you freedom, you kind of lose a freedom of being able to do for yourself.
Another thing is a lot of the market right now and economy is based off of like Silicon Valley and big internet corporations. If something were to happen with that, it all crash. That's where most of the money is entering the market.
You ever hear anything about solar flares?
Coronal mass ejection, yes. I think about that all the time.
If one of those hits, it can fry the entire system.
Yeah, I know. And the people near outlets might get electrocuted. And
there's like nothing you can do.
We'd have to replace every circuit. Everything. In the country, every electronic device.
We need to start proofing those in some way.
We can't. There was a big project by NASA to do it some years ago. They couldn't get funding. They're basically going to build a solar shield, like a satellite that could deploy these arms. Because it takes it a little while to get here, but there's nothing we can do.
Right. Unless
you disassemble absolutely everything right before it comes. But it only takes like 20 hours to reach us. Because it's like an electron plasma cloud, so it's very slow. But
right.
The last one was in like 1850 when the only electronics on Earth were in
Clark
Maxwell's lab. It destroyed those. That was probably terrifying. It will be terrifying if it happens.
Yeah, I mean, they've said through some of the records and some of the things they've seen that they believe there's even a time when people went underground for periods of time and lived in caves because radiation was high enough.
Wow.
That's why you see some of like all these dugout caves and cave systems.
Dang. That would be terrifying. We had to go into caves.
To go underground.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where we're gonna go either. The population is just exploding too.
I know.
Exponentially. Honestly,
it's sort of it's a very contentious opinion, but that's sort of why I'm pro-abortion.
Yeah.
Pro-choice. It's sort of we need something needs to control it. Although I wouldn't say I'm
pro-choice.
But
we're having less children though too.
That is good.
Now, some countries in Europe, they're having baby-making campaigns because they don't have enough people.
Like France and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of that has to do with, both genders being in the workplace. When women work, then they don't really have time to have kids. Like, I'm not saying anything.
Right.
Like, they shouldn't. I mean, you do whatever you want to do, but if nobody's having kids and everybody's working, then eventually everything will just collapse.
I don't know. It's a crazy time to be alive, and I'm sure every generation has sat and, thought that, but... We're in such a place, it's just such exponential growth, and I don't know that we can even adapt to how fast stuff is changing.
I know, and we're in the first really era or epoch in history where apocalypse is possible at any moment, really. Yeah. I mean, global warming.
I mean, always you could get hit by a comet or an asteroid.
Yeah, but that's very unlikely, and it never happened before. But now we are causing.
I feel like there have been mass extinction events before.
Yeah, there have been 5: the Ordovician, Silurian, the Late Devonian, the Permian Triassic extinction, the Triassic Jurassic extinction, the Late Cretaceous extinction.
There you
go. Yeah, but none of them involved humans. Humans have only been around for about 100,000.
I feel like there was the Ice Age with the humans.
With the humans, that killed
a lot of
some
people think that there was an impact that actually caused the Ice Age.
We're technically in an extinction event, the Holocene extinction, or Anthropocene as people, because so many, not just because of humans, not just because of us, they're environmental factors, but we've disrupted the carbon cycle so much that it can never go back, so we don't know what's going to happen. There are many predictions, and they're all pessimistic, pretty much.
You think we could make it in space at all?
Perhaps. It'd probably be our best hope.
Or in the oceans. Actually, I don't know about the oceans.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I want to contend with giant octopi or squids.
Yeah. What about space? You think we make a space? We're going to Mars soon.
Maybe Mars. That'd be... I mean, we're supposed to colonize Mars by, like, what, 2030?
How are you going to terraform it?
Just like inflatable dome structures, and then you start cultivating crops, hopefully. They have a very iron-rich soil, so maybe there's something we can do with that.
Jeez. Couldn't you just put bacteria in there?
You could.
Are there any bacteria
we could start, like,
that
cultures.
feed iron and put out oxygen or CO2?
I don't think they would eat
They put out an atmosphere.
I don't know if we could get an atmosphere because they're
What about, do they have any sulfur in there?
The sulfur, probably. I mean, I'm sure that most of the elements are present on Mars.
Like, do they have volcanoes and such there? Like,
not really.
A lot of people
no,
think
because the core is cool.
A lot of people think that on Earth, a lot of stuff started in those sulfuric like vents in the ocean.
There's life that's not carbon-based, not fully carbon-based by those sulfur vents. They're like sulfur-based. Like sulfur dioxide is their primary source of energy, which... Oh, this is something interesting, actually. Did you hear about how they found advanced organic chemicals on Saturn's moon Enceladus? No. This was like last week. I don't know exactly. I believe they sent something there to take a sample, maybe, or maybe they from satellite images. I don't know the exact. I don't know the exact process by which they determined it, but they claim that there's a very good chance that there could be like microbial life living there because they found organic molecules. Yeah, on the moon at least.
Supposedly they found stuff on a space on the outside that was able to survive.
There are
outer space.
Tardigrades can survive in outer space. Little ice bears.
That's what they were.
Those are like my favorite creatures.
They find them deep in caves too, right?
Mm-hmm. They find them everywhere. They like don't die. They're practically immortal creatures.
Do they like go dormant when they go?
They go absolutely dormant when they can't get oxygen or. Like they
then
freeze.
There's people that theorize that Earth was seeded by an asteroid that had somehow those bacteria on them. And
that was Francis Crick and Watson, the two guys that discovered DNA. Yeah, he wrote a whole book about how DNA is so complex it could have only come from an alien planet. So he said that's the only possible way it could be here, which DNA is quite complex.
We still have no idea what viruses are either. Yeah,
I mean, they're just like non-living things just going around injecting every cell they can. There are no.
Man, this has been good. Okay, we're gonna have to wrap it up because we need to sleep tonight. It's getting late. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks.
It was a good talk. Hopefully, we definitely went over some people's heads. I think at times it was over our heads. So
yeah,
we just kind of like to spew stuff out there. Hope you enjoyed it. Come on another round?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
come on another round. We have a lot more to say, but
that's maybe
all right for tonight. Done.